The U.S. Bashar envoy Tim Lenderking says from Riyadh that resolution to conflict must start now. Houthi rebels ignore all international calls to lift siege on Abdiyah and continue their offensive. Houthi rebels shelled civilian areas in Hodeidah, violating Stockholm peace agreement. Good evening and welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. As part of his tour in the region, the U.S. envoy Tim Lenderking discussed current developments with senior Yemeni government officials in Riyadh. The U.S. envoy said that finding a solution to conflict must start now. Lenderking added all voices and different perspectives should be heard. In Abdiyah, Houthi militia completely destroyed 6 villages and launched massive attack on about 18 others, amid a continuous wave of displacement. Local sources said that Houthi militia has completely cut off communications and internet networks as they bombed communication towers in the district. Meanwhile, the Arab coalition in Yemen announced that Houthi militia had incurred heavy losses among the rebels during the past 24 hours. The coalition stated that targeting operations resulted in killing 160 Houthi fighters and destroying 11 military vehicles. Despite all international calls to stop fighting and lift siege on Al-Abdiyah, Houthi rebels seem to have ignored all these calls and continued surrounding the area. The following report has more on this story.
Houthi militia has ignored international calls to stop their military escalation and end 3-week siege of Abdiyah district south of Ma'rib. They targeted Al-Rawdah and killed children. They shelled Al-Abdiyah's only hospital with a ballistic missile. They increased their military on the district in conjunction with intense confrontations in Juba district. This prevented hundreds of civilians from leaving their areas. Houthi militia escalated their attacks on the district's center hours after calls made by the Secretary General of the United Nations and his special envoy to Yemen, Linda Greenfield, the representative of the United States, said the Council must call out Houthi obstruction as they have repeatedly refused to agree on a ceasefire or on constructive engagement with the United Nations. Likewise, the representative of the United Kingdom, Barbara Woodward, said it is painful to see the continuous Houthi offensive on Ma'rib, including the siege of Al-Abdiyah. It is our duty in this council to now put more pressure on Houthis to put an end to such appalling indiscriminate attacks. It is essential to respect international humanitarian law, including protecting civilians and helping them out of conflict zones, she added. Residents of Ma'rib witnessed a horrific act on October the 3rd when Houthis fired a missile at a densely populated Al-Rawdah area, killing 2 children and wounding 33 civilians. Many women and children attended the burial and condemned Houthi militia's practices against civilians.
We are parents of victims of Houthi militia missile bombing that targeted Al-Rawdah and killed our innocent children who were safe in their homes. We call on the world and international community to protect human rights and children in Yemen. We urgently appeal to them to stop such heinous crimes.
Houthi militia kills young children with ballistic missiles, and today we are burying children. We call on the international community to protect us from ballistic missiles.
Houthi militia also bombed the only hospital in the district with a ballistic missile, which doubles the humanitarian suffering of civilians there. For its part, Doctors Without Borders in Yemen condemned the missile attack on Ali Abdul Mughni Hospital in Abdiyah. The statement said it is the main and only hospital providing urgent care to patients in the region's ongoing conflict. Civilians, medical workers and hospitals should never be a target, the statement added. Yemeni cities are subject to all kinds of violations and Abdiyah is no less. Will these repeated calls from the international community change anything on the ground? Our Houthi violations against Yemenis and their continuous indifference will continue.
Houthi militia has mobilized more troops from 5 governorates to fight in Ma'rib. Sources have confirmed that Houthi militia reinforcements estimated at more than 500 armed men. Those fighters come from Sana'a, Amran, Damar and Hajjah. Houthi militia siege on Al-Abdiyya in Ma'rib enters its third week. Such siege has prevented people from basic necessities. More on the story is in the following report.
Houthi militia continued siege of Al-Abdiyya district south of Ma'rib Governorate in light of the severe shortage of most of the basic materials is of grave concern, Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor said in a statement. Massive Houthi forces have been besieging more than 35,000 civilians for the past 3 weeks in Al-Abdiyya as part of the rebels' attempts to wrest control of the district from the Yemeni government, which is backed by air cover from the Arab coalition. The Houthi forces have prevented food and mineral water from reaching the population, causing the essential supplies to become scarce in the district. This left the population no choice but to drink untreated water. In addition, due to the running out of fuel, the complete blackout causes all the health facilities in the district to shut down, except one medical unit that provides treatment to the wounded with the most possibilities. The Houthi militia has escalated their artillery and missile attacks on the district since the beginning of this week, coinciding with the intensification of the Arab coalition's air raids to prevent the militia advance amid the absence of supply lines or safe humanitarian corridors for the civilian population to leave. Over the past months, Al-Abdiyya has been a haven for hundreds of families displaced from military operations in the neighboring Rahba district. However, the escalation of fighting and the intensification of the siege in Al-Abdiyya portend a significant sharp in the humanitarian situation, especially among the displaced families, in light of their inability to provide for basic needs. Civilians are always the most affected by the conflict in Yemen, as they constantly pay a heavy price for the non-commitment of the warring parties to neutralize them from military operations, said Yusuf Salim, legal researcher at Euro-Mediterranean Monitor. The Houthi rebels' practice of policy of collective punishment against the civilian population in Al-Abdiyya is a serious violation of relevant international laws and protocols, especially with regard to the principle of proportionality and the text that prohibits starvation and intimidation of civilians.
In Al-Jaw, several Houthi militia were killed and wounded in an infiltration attempt east of Al-Hazm. A military source confirmed that the government forces monitored Houthi movement towards an attempt to infiltrate militia members towards Canal Front. However, most of the infiltrating elements have been killed or wounded, while the rest of them fled. Turning to Hodeidah, joint forces defended Houthis continues attacks in violations of Stockholm Agreement. According to military sources, Houthi militia targeted military sites with mortars and machine guns on Kilo 16, Al-Durayhimi and Al-Jah fronts, and the joint forces inflicted direct casualties on the rebels. Still in Hodeidah, Houthi militia targeted residential villages in Al-Jabaliyya, south of Tuhaita. Local sources stated that Houthi targeting was very discriminate. This caused fear among civilians and disrupted their work and peace. In Sana'a, schools under the control of Houthi militia prevented students from entering unless they pay money to commemorate the Prophet's birthday. Local sources said that a number of schools allowed students to enter after paying an amount between 250 and 500 riyals. Houthi militia imposed these illegal ransoms on every student in areas under their control. Since they seized the capital Sana'a, Houthi rebels have been depleting all aspects of life. Their aggression has reached climax when they started injecting the school curriculum with their poisonous sectarian ideology. This report has more on this story.
6 years on, Yemeni children's education has become one of the greatest casualties of Yemen's devastating and ongoing conflict. According to a new report published by UNICEF today, over 2 million school-age girls and boys are now out of school as poverty, conflict, and lack of opportunities disrupt their education. This is double the number of out-of-school children in 2015 when the conflict started. Also, access to quality education is a basic right for every child, including girls, displaced children, and those with disabilities. Sir Philip Duhamel, UNICEF representative to Yemen, said that the conflict has a staggering impact on every aspect of children's lives. Yet, access to education provides a sense of normalcy for children in even the most desperate contexts and protects them from multiple forms of exploitation. Keeping children in school is critical for their own future and the future of Yemen. The report highlights that when children are not in school, the consequences are dire for both their present and their future. Girls are being forced into early marriage, where they remain trapped in a cycle of poverty and unfulfilled potential. Boys and girls are more vulnerable to being coerced into child labor or recruited into the fighting. More than 3,600 children in Yemen were recruited by Houthi militia in the past 6 years. To make matters worse, 2/3 of teachers in Yemen, over 170,000 teachers in total, haven't received a regular salary for more than 4 years because of the conflict and the geopolitical divides. This puts around 4 million additional children at risk of disrupted education or dropping out as unpaid teachers quit teaching to find other ways of providing for their families. Children who do not finish their education are trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle of poverty. If out-of-school children or those who have dropped out recently are not properly supported, they may never return to school. The combined effects of the prolonged conflict and the latest assault on education by Houthi rebels and COVID-19 pandemic will have devastating and long-lasting effects on the learning, as well as the mental and the physical well-being of children and adolescents in Yemen. In the report, UNICEF calls for all stakeholders in Yemen to uphold children's right to education and work together to achieve lasting and inclusive peace. This includes stopping attacks on schools, ensuring teachers get a regular income so that children can continue to learn and grow, and for international donors to support education programs with long-term funding.
Coming next. In the midst of this war, vulnerable Yemeni women pay highest price.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بأهلها في المزرعة. والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللغم، دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى الماء ترى تبقعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها نغير الشبالة اللي هي البنت سابحة من دور رجليها، لما صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها هي بطلت رجليها كامل.
قلت أزود هلي وقابل لي لعام وطبعت تحت الزواية.
Welcome back. In Ib, a senior Houthi official and his gunmen assaulted women while they were trying to rob a citizen's flora. Local residents said that Tariq al-Kamil, Houthi militia security director in Al-Qaeda, tried to seize a land in Day al-Sufal and assaulted women upon their arrival and beat them. It's the most vulnerable that the war hits badly. Women have paid the highest price of this mad war. The following report tracks the suffering of Yemeni women.
Citizens of all ages and genders have felt the devastating impacts left on Yemen in the wake of countless wars. Women in particular have borne the weight of the war in disproportionate ways. From child marriage to discriminatory legal systems, women have labored under oppression that is rooted in far more than war. Increasing psychological and economic burdens fall upon the shoulders of women as men pack for war. Wives, mothers, and daughters bear the brunt of men's absence, taking on new responsibilities with no preparation. They're faced with the sudden need to market and provide, resulting in a shift in gender roles. And although the role shift has produced a marked difference in women's status in society, it has also caused a rise in the rate of domestic violence as men start to feel emasculated by the change. But the violence women face isn't confined to their homes. Women find themselves thrust under the rule of religious extremists who emerge from chaos into power. Women's rights organizations have reported the persecution of women who voice their opposition to the Houthis and the armed Shia movement. Women also face prevalent arbitrary detention, physical and sexual violence in prison, and unfounded prostitution charges. In spite of the odds stacked against them, women remain vehicles of positive change, firmly positioned at the forefront of efforts to hamper the spread of disease. Their role is vital as they're responsible for distributing resources, educating household members about hygiene, and rationing resources. Declining access to water and sanitary products has negatively impacted women across the country, as they are commonly tasked with fetching water and are subsequently vulnerable to attacks while carrying out their roles. Additionally, women are plighted by the scarcity of sanitary products and private hygienic toilets. Those most affected by the extreme levels of disease are women, among whom are breastfeeding and malnourished, who are at higher risk of contracting cholera. Those most affected by extreme levels of disease are women, among whom are breastfeeding and malnourished, who are at higher risk of contracting cholera. In spite of risk, women may feel less inclined to seek medical help due to a lack of autonomy and control over household resources. All the while, girls sadly remain a currency for war-torn households. In 2017, the UN's Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that 52% of Yemeni girls and women have gotten married before the age of 18. Destitute families have married off girls as young as 8 years old in hopes of rectifying their financial situations. Yemen has ranked last in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index for 14 consecutive years, and women have been enduring deeply rooted gender inequality. While the conflict has left its effects on all civilians, Yemeni women in particular have taken on the bulk of the distress. Various afflictions such as patriarchal attitudes and economic inequality have left women more vulnerable to the effects of war.
How the human rights violations have transcended all space and time. Black minority children have fallen prey of Houthi religious propaganda. Blackmailed as grandsons of Bilal, they are sent to war fronts to fight with them. The following report has more on this story.
The situation of the marginalized people worsened even more during the war, as this minority faced a real danger due to the Houthis mobilizing many children and youth of this category to the camps and pushing them to the battlefronts, under the name Bilal's descendants, as a racist term added to the groups of terms that they call, where many of them were killed and wounded in a war in which they have no power. The marginalized are the dark-skinned, and the majority of the people of this segment, estimated at 3 million people or 12% of the population of Yemen, who live under extremely dangerous educational and health conditions because of the racial discrimination that is practiced on them socially and politically, taking advantage of the state of ignorance, extreme poverty, fear, and the urgent need of the young men and women of this category to secure food for their families. They are deprived of the enjoyment of the most basic human rights and living in settlements built of thatch or tin. Houthi terrorism was not limited to the expulsion and displacement of marginalized people from their dilapidated population centers. Recently, the militia recruited the marginalized and plunged thousands of them into the battlefronts as part of crimes that expose the poorest groups to genocide. After the forced displacement of 300,000 marginalized people from their areas of control, according to studies funded by UNICEF, the Houthis exploited this group in large-scale campaigns of polarization and pushed them to mass death burns, including fighting, digging trenches, and transferring weapons after the Great deficit in ranks of its fighters. The head of the union concerned with the defense of the rights of the marginalized explained that the militias deceived those people by calling them Bilal's descendants as part of their religious propaganda to integrate them into society, but in the end it recruited them to face their inevitable fate on the death fronts. Houthi militia pushed hundreds of these children to the outskirts of Ma'rib and Al-Jawf, which are the burning fronts, where many of them returned to their families with dead bodies. The Yemeni human rights defender called on the United Nations organizations concerned with the affairs of minorities and refugees to protect the marginalized from the danger of the Houthi war, which pursues ethnic cleansing, human trafficking, and exploitation of their lives in its absurd wars. We call on the United Nations to carry out its humanitarian and moral duties regarding these crimes against children and marginalized people, and to stop the Houthi militias' exploitation of the living conditions of this segment and their use as fuel for the battles that target the security of Yemen, the region, and the world.
Exchange shops and money transfer companies in Aden, Hadramaut, and Taiz closed their doors and refrained from selling or buying currencies in protest against this significant deterioration of the national currency against foreign currencies. Exchange rate of the US dollar exceeded 1,300 rials, while the exchange rate of the Saudi rial approached the barrier of 350 rials. This comes in light of the government's inability to confront this deterioration in the currency rate. The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 17 new cases of the COVID-19 in 5 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 5 cases were recorded in Taiz, 5 in Aden, 5 in Hadramaut, 2 in Shabwa, and 2 in Al Bayda. Also 4 deaths were recorded, plus 38 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 9,512, including 1,802 deaths and 6,028 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The U.S. Special Envoy Tim Lenderking says from Riyadh that resolution to conflict must start now. Houthi rebels ignore all international calls to lift siege on Abdiyah and continue their offensive. Houthi rebels shell civilian areas in Hodeidah, violating Stockholm peace agreement. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.